So what is happening at the Supreme Court? Because my friend Dan Bongino made a little announcement that they're digging into something, that something being the leaking of the Dobbs decision, you know, the overturning of Roe versus Wade, that leaked, and then the animals took to the streets, and it's not supposed to work like that. Joining me now, my friend Josh Hammer, host of the Josh Hammer Show. Josh, okay, what's going on? First of all, let's recap this Dobbs decision stuff. What happened with the leak? Why is the leak even a big deal? They made the decision.
Jesse, I could tell you exactly the date, and I could tell you exactly where I was when I found out. And every time that years later, you know exactly what time it was and where you were when something happens, that's generally a good indication that it was a big effing deal, as Joe Biden famously said about Obamacare passing. It was May 3rd, 2022. I was in my apartment getting back from dinner in Miami, Florida around 9 p.m. I remember it like it was yesterday. This was an incredible thing, a just astonishing thing to happen, to have a draft opinion of the United States Supreme Court leak. You have to understand, Jesse, just how few people had access to this particular document. You're talking here about the 9 justices. They're law clerks, and in theory, that's literally it. So 8 of the 9 justices have 4 law clerks apiece. The chief is entitled to 5. Sometimes he only takes 4. Either way, you're not looking at a whole lot of people here. So, I mean, maybe someone printed out the document and threw it in the trash, and the janitor just happened to look in. I'm not buying it. I have never bought it for a second there. And the court's internal investigation didn't exactly do a particularly robust job in trying to turn over the goods, did it? No. Far from it, actually. They brought the former Homeland Security Secretary from the Bush administration, Michael Chertoff, who came in and led this third-party investigation, essentially said we are able to conclude nothing. I don't buy it. I don't buy it for a second. I'm not sure exactly what's going on. I have frankly never been sure exactly what's going on. I have my suspicions as to who might have leaked this thing. There are a handful of far-left law clerks with notorious track records. There was one liberal law clerk with long-standing ties to one of the Politico writers on the byline that leaked it there, so that would be a decent prospect. Jesse, I'll get in trouble for saying this. I have long thought it's entirely possible that Sonia Sotomayor herself did, actually. I actually think that she is not above that. I think that she is that low. But either way, this is one of the great unsolved mysteries in American political and legal life over my entire adult lifetime, especially over the past few years there. And I have been saying for years that I will not forget it, and I'm not going to forget it. And I hope, God willing, that we get to the bottom of it.
Josh, we'll come back to this specific case, but could you elaborate why it matters so much? Because it very clearly does. You rarely get that fired up about anything. The decision had been made. Who cares if it leaks early? Why is it a big deal?
Well, the decision was not quite made yet. So this came in May 2022. The decision came out in late June. So it came out about a month and a half later. So the timing of this leak was done with a deliberate intent to try to dissuade the justices who were going to sign to overturn Roe versus Wade from doing so. Jesse, let's remember, that's why Nicholas Roski, this young left-wing domestic anarchist from California, decided to fly cross country from California to Maryland. He brought his handgun, he brought zip ties, burglaries, tools, a screwdriver, trying to then burglarize the home of Brett Kavanaugh and ultimately murder him, God forbid, for being on the side of overturning Roe versus Wade. Now, Roski at the last minute decided to call the cops on himself there, so he didn't go through with the deed. But that was the intent. Whoever leaked this, whether it was a member of the court, whether it was a clerk, or whether it was the janitor or someone else, whoever did this had one goal and one goal only, and that was to cause mayhem and indeed incentivize and foment violence against the justices of the United States Supreme Court. That is why you saw these not always particularly peaceful protests outside the homes of John Roberts, Amy Coney Barrett, Brett Kavanaugh. That is why you saw this nut job in California, Roski, fly to try to assassinate Brett Kavanaugh there. Jesse, I clerked on a federal court, not the Supreme Court, but the Fifth Circuit. Courts have to work with the understanding that this is not going to happen. You're not going to trust your colleagues. If you have an understanding that when you put in an email, when you put in a draft opinion, what one clerk, one judge says to another there, the court simply cannot function if there is any expectation that what is said and discussed internally can ever be released publicly. So it'll have a deeply chilling effect on the way that the court conducts its business. But most importantly there, this almost led to the assassination of Brett Kavanaugh.
Okay, Josh, now you obviously have some clerk experience yourself with your legal background. Could you elaborate for those of us who are never going to be in those rooms with all the smart, intelligent legal minds? What security protocols are in place? You already mentioned there's a couple filthy commies, because of course there would be. That's who's going to work for Ketanji Brown Jackson and Sotomayor and whatnot. They're not going to find sane people. They're going to find vile little communists who will have no compunction about leaking things out whenever. So do you what? Do you have to have your phone monitored, your computer? How does this work? Because what's to stop these people?
Well, it's a very legitimate question. So, I mean, there is real security at federal courthouses. The federal courthouse that I clerked in had a metal detector. There were federal agents there. There was sometimes local police outside the building as well. I've been to the U.S. Supreme Court. There is certainly a metal detector and security as well there. But, you know, I think that there are a lot of federal judges these days, Jesse, who increasingly are not necessarily always trustworthy, and they want to take security into their own hands. I think that there are an increasingly large number of judges, especially Republican nominated, Trump nominated, right of center judges, who want to actually carry a firearm, you know, in their chambers there, in their hearings when they're walking. Because, I mean, think about it logistically there. I mean, the judge will typically park in the parking lot beneath the courthouse there. But I mean, you know, judges, like politicians, I mean, we're all ultimately exposed in some form or another there. So yeah, a lot of these people ultimately want to carry guns and take matters into their own hands. But all of this is part of the and here's the important context. All of this is part of the left's decades-long assault on right of center judges and people who adhere to right of center constitutional principles. Jesse, this goes back literally as far as 1987, when Ted Kennedy and Joe Biden tag teamed to bork Robert Bork. Robert Bork was Reagan's nominee for the Supreme Court there. Ted Kennedy gave this infamous speech about how Bob Bork wants to bring back the segregationist lunch counters in Greensboro, North Carolina. Women are going to be having coat hanger, back alley abortions. 4 years after that was when Joe Biden trotted out Anita Hill to produce to Clarence Thomas, what Clarence Thomas referred to as a high-tech lynching. People forget about Sam Alito, his own contentious Supreme Court confirmation hearing in 2006. It was so terrible that his wife, sitting behind her on the C-SPAN camera, was literally brought to tears because she was just so struck what these Democrat senators were saying about her upstanding husband. And then Brett Kavanaugh, my God, 2018, Christine Blasey Ford, that speaks for itself. So for literally decades, prior to when I was born, these demons on the left have been doing all they can to foment the seeds of discord and ultimately to try to put targets on the back of conservative judges. Brett Kavanaugh, again, was almost assassinated because of this.
Did the Supreme Court tell Donald Trump that he could deport people to South Sudan, or is he still just asking?
Yeah, look, ultimately, Jesse, the Supreme Court has no such authority. I mean, if the Supreme Court even were in theory, and they do not do so in uncertain legal terms, to be clear, but if they were to very clearly say, you shall deport this individual or these individuals to a certain country there, it would be null and void for lack of jurisdiction. When it comes to immigration and enforcement actions, there is something in constitutional law called the plenary power doctrine, which essentially says that the political branches, Congress and the executive branch, have full, sweeping, absolute plenary power to enforce this nation's immigration laws. The first time that a federal immigration enforcement statute was ever declared unconstitutional by the court was 2018. We went, 230 years, whatever, before we got there. So immigration laws are presumptively constitutional. The executive branch has the ability to enforce that. And frankly, when the Supreme Court attempts to try to dictate to the executive branch how to enforce immigration law, they are wildly overstepping their boundaries.
Josh, thank you, as always, my man. I would thank you for coming to my YouTube channel, but I know how brilliant it is, and I know you love it here. So subscribe and watch. We're going to start really ramping things up and putting some funny stuff, some interesting stuff out there, some collaborations. Either way, my YouTube channel is officially the place to be. So stick around.